Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I am Richard Dugan, Reverend Dr. D. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. We have a very interesting program. I think you're going to enjoy it. I always do, especially with those conversations. You don't really know exactly which way they're going to go, but obviously we also talk about the thing that is foremost on our guest's mind. Our guest, who is our guest? She is an author. Her name is, and if I'm correct, it's last name is Michelson, Elana Michelson.
Elana Michelson.
Michelson. Beg your pardon.
Almost right.
I knew Elana. There was an Elana that I knew in, I think it was high school. And I thought, that's an interesting and unusual name. I'd never heard that before. But it was also speaking to the fact that I don't get out much. So there you go. It's great to have you with us, Elana, and to talk about your book, which is a novel. It's called Who Killed the Vibe in Flanders, Massachusetts. It's going to be interesting, folks. You're going to want to get a copy. It's the port. I beg your pardon. The port of the Solution. It's a mystery, and that's actually the title of the book. The synopsis, in essence, is
actually you almost got it right. You almost got it right, Richard. It's part of the solution.
Oh, I beg your pardon. My dyslexia here. I tell you, part, P-A-R-T, ladies and gentlemen. I will get this right though. Elana Michelson author.com is the website, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't the best, but we'll keep moving forward and talk a little bit about this particular work. Your first novel?
Yes, it's not my first book because I'm a retired academic, so I've got all sorts of scholarship in my past, but this is the first novel.
And we had a rather interesting conversation earlier, prior to our conversation here, to this interview, as far as your academics and so forth, and so forth. I'm curious, but we'll jump first into the book here a little bit. Why do mystery novels, Agatha Christie, those kinds of things intrigue you to where you thought, I've got an idea. This would be an interesting mystery if this happened, and then you get them all sequestered into a room. And I brought you all here because I have discovered who the murderer is, or whatever the case may be. Tell us a little bit about why a mystery novel?
Well, why a mystery novel? Well, as I said, I'm an academic, and my degrees are all in literature. And when you spend your life reading the greatest deathless prose in human history, it's very intimidating to sit down and write a novel. And I thought a murder mystery genre fiction has a slightly different kind of different set of expectations, and I love murder mysteries. I always had. And I thought it would be really interesting to bring the world of Agatha Christie's classical murder mysteries where you have all of the clues and you have all the red herrings and you figured out where to drop the clues because you're trying to fool the reader, but still be fair to the reader. I thought it would be really interesting to bring that kind of small village, small group of suspects whodunit into a very, very different world. So part of theSolution is set in the late 70s in a little hippie community in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. And it's got all of the classic structure of a murder mystery, but it's a hugely, hugely different environment, culturally and socially and politically. The characters are things like one owns a craft shop, one owns a cafe, one owns the local food pantry, one is a radical historian, an academic, one is an activist, peacenik, Episcopalian minister, one is a tarot card reader. So all of the suspects in this little town all come together in a way that really tries to capture the vibe of the 1970s and be true to the vibe of the 1970s, while at the same time being a whodunit.
Elana Michelson is our guest talking about her whodunit, part of theSolution, AMystery. We hope that you'll get yourself a copy by going to AlanaMichelson.author.com. We'll be linked to that website as well. Now, I'm a writer, I guess an author. I've got my one book after trying to get it put together and finished after 20 years. I have to chuckle because there were times along the way where I thought, I really need to finish this thing. And of course, being the metaphysician that I am, I also realized too that, well, maybe it's not the right time, got to let the universe guide. It's one of the aspects of your book because, as you say, it takes place in the late 70s, which that particular period, because I was introduced to metaphysics and more spiritual and thinking and so forth. You've chose that era. Why that particular period in history?
Well, I have you beat by 20 years if you've only been writing a book. If you've only been writing a book for 20, because I set this in 1978 because the very, very first version of it was written in 1978. I had just finished graduate school. I just finished a dissertation. I realized I am never going to have work habits like this again, where I know I can sit down, force myself in front of what at the time was a typewriter and work for X number of hours and get up the next morning and do it again. And if I was ever going to write a novel, this was the time to do it. So I sat down, wrote a murder mystery that was set in the contemporary period. Almost got it published, didn't get it published, and then it sat in a drawer for the better part of 40 years. And a couple of years ago, I pulled it out of the drawer. It was still the typewritten copy I had written originally, and I reread it. And I realized that, that on the one hand, the writing was pretty sophomoric. I was very glad, in retrospect, it hadn't been published. But that the mystery held up, the actual structure of the murder mystery held up with all the clues and all the whodunit stuff. But that it might be really interesting to rewrite it as a retrospective, going back and thinking back on those times and who we were and what we tried to do and what we did and what we didn't manage to accomplish. And to turn the lens of being pretty much at the other end of a long and what's been a good life, turn that lens back on that time and see if I could tease out what some of the interesting echoes of that time might be to rewrite and take another look at now. I think there is a kind of retrospective going on now for some reasons that are obvious and some reasons maybe not so obvious about what the counterculture meant, what the politics of the time meant, and what can be gleaned from that now. So the book is, in some ways, it's a comedy of manners. It's a period piece. It's got a soundtrack, and it's got the banter of how we talked in those days, and it's got what the posters on the walls were, and what music we were listening to, and what we were talking about, and how we were talking about it. But I also tried to bring a kind of serious lens to the questions that were facing those folks as the don't trust anyone over 30 generation was one by one turning 30.
I was lucky. I was only turning 20 in the late 70s. So there you go. It's interesting too, the language, because in this information that I have here, there's the word groovy and the vibe, and it's cool and so forth. One that actually came to my mind from that period of time because of one of my favorite artists, the phrase "far out," and a lot of people use that now. And I got really taken aback when I moved here to Santa Barbara in 2006, and I was working for a TV station. And I started hearing different words like back in that era that your book is in. Today, it's like you hear the word sick, and I'm going, "Are you okay?" "Oh, no. Sick is that's a real positive thing. If it's sick, it's really good, and other things like that. Phrases I do not care for are "it's all good." If you're trying to fix a car and it's not running and you say it's all good, no, it's not all good. Fix the car. I find that funny in one sense. Some terms actually mean the opposite of what you would think that they would mean. That's one of the interesting things too, is in terms of language, not just the slang, but in terms of the way in which the people in your book communicate. As juxtaposed to the different periods that you and I have lived through in the 80s, 90s, and here we are in the 2020s, and so forth. And sometimes people even will use in their verbiage, "Oh yeah, well, LOL," or they'll use the acronyms. They'll speak the acronyms that we're using as we text. Obviously, I was in my teens in the 70s, going into my 20s, and you were a far sight further along there. I'm curious about that in terms of the language and making sure that as people are reading it, they understand the context. Because that was one of the things that I found helpful is in listening, for example, to Shakespeare. Right? I got to listen to more than just the individual words. I got to listen to the whole thing and maybe re-listen to it to get the context. And maybe I'll understand some of these words that I've never used in my vocabulary before. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was very conscious of the language. It was, hey, this is a groovy murder mystery, is the language that, that my publisher is using, the publicist is using. It's not the language that the characters use. I was absolutely committed to not writing cliched language so the people do not walk into rooms and say, "Hey man, what's happening?" or "Hey, dig it." There isn't that kind of cliched language. On the other hand, I also had to make sure, and I had to go through the book a few times. I had to make sure that they weren't speaking in a kind of slang that didn't exist then. There was one point I read it, and one of the characters had said to another, "Don't bother me, I don't have the bandwidth." Well, we didn't use the word bandwidth in the 70s. So what I tried to do is create a kind of dialogue, and the dialogue, just as a writer, the thing that is the most fun for me to write is dialogue. I love writing dialogue. I wanted the dialogue to be snappy. I wanted it to be quick enough moving that, that it would really command the attention of anybody reading or listening to it. But I wanted it to be able to carry the seriousness of what the conversations were. And I wanted the attention to be not on the cliches of the time, but on some of the more abiding questions that people argued then and are still arguing now. And one of the things I realized as I rewrote it, because basically every word in the book has been rewritten, is that while at the time I said, "Oh, I'll write a murder mystery," it doesn't have the same kind of expectations that a serious literary novel might have. But I realized in rewriting it that a murder mystery is actually an interesting genre if what you want to do is talk about some very fundamental social issues that face all of us. The question, for example, of what does justice mean? Well, justice means something very different to the different characters. There are two detectives, one of whom is the actual official detective, who is this young, very, very well-meaning, lovely guy, but who is, a member of the criminal justice system of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and justice to him has to mean following particular kinds of laws and particular kind of procedures, versus the amateur detective, the main character, whose name is Jennifer, who has both the responsibility on the one hand and the luxury on the other of being able to try to figure out for herself what justice means. She can improvise a sense of justice because ultimately she has to answer only to her own conscience. She doesn't have to answer to the laws of the Commonwealth. And so all kinds of questions. What does justice mean? What does community mean? What does loyalty mean? Because Jennifer, in the end in the novel, has to make a decision that will haunt her forever, where she basically has to decide where her loyalties lie. And the question of who has earned our loyalty, who are we obliged to be loyal to, and loyal to what? Not only to whom, but loyal to what? And what finally do those decisions say about both who we are as individual human beings and about the nature of the social contract that all of us have to live in, that all of us have to try to figure out ways in which our actual behavior and the decisions we make carries the values that we purport to hold. And actually, murder mystery is as good as any genre in fiction for thinking about those things.
I think it's fascinating. And one of the subjects that I've talked about on this program has to do with the aspect that words have power. The words that are chosen by whomever it is that you are listening to, or even yourself, you chose them for a reason. And I always use this example going back to I want to say it was the either the late 80s or early 90s in Phoenix, Arizona, and we had a gentleman running for governor, and he was a car dealer, which kind of gives you an idea of where this might be going. But he raised in the primary, he raised this one issue of his opponent, and the issue, of course, had been resolved like 10 years earlier, and there was no real story. But this gentleman began to speak about it in his dialogue, his speeches, and so forth, and just sort of denigrating his opponent. Well, of course, he ended up winning the primary and going on to win the governorship. And I thought, well, wait a minute. If the issue was resolved, and of course his opponent had mentioned it and said, hey, there is nothing here, and yet there were people who chose and voted because maybe of that story. And people say, well, Richard, you're being naive. It's just politics. I says, no, it's not just politics. This gentleman, the car dealer running for governor, chose the words he chose, as obviously in terms of the attack ads and so forth, for a reason. It's not just politics. You cannot excuse it at that. He is trying to acquire a position, an elected position in Arizona government. So he has an intent with those words. You can't just shove it to the side and say it's just politics.
Yeah.
Well, what ended up happening, as you might say, karma kind of comes and goes. He ended up being the very first governor in the state of Arizona to be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. And I don't even remember what the issue was. It doesn't always happen that fast, because that only took maybe a year or two after he acquired the office that he was elected for. But it seems as though we go through this. We had that in the early 70s. I remember enough about it. And we had a president who, to avoid impeachment, resigned, and so forth. He got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And then, of course, this governor in Arizona. And then we've had, in the 90s, we had one president who was impeached but not removed from office. And I thought, why are you even bothering? Because nobody even remembers that the guy was impeached, nor was he removed from office. So what's your point? Congress, what is your point? Well, we're living in an era now over the past 10 years. We have the same situation, and we go back to the conversation on the power of words have power. And certain words are chosen for certain reasons. And in some instances, certain words are chosen because the individual really doesn't know how to communicate. And I know that Ronald Reagan was labeled as the great communicator, and so forth. And of course, I know I'm going, I was sticking my toes into the political realm, but this is everywhere. Talk to us a little bit about the words that you have chosen in your book, and even the words that you choose as we converse here. And what your perspective is on how powerful words are, and our consciousness, how we need to be aware of that fact as we move through this life.
Those are really interesting questions. And I do believe that words have power. I believe that even if we assume that everybody has the best possible intentions and are trying to tell the truth, and if we're talking about current politics, which we can, I'm not sure that's the best use of our time, but clearly not everybody right now in this world, in this country, is committed to telling the truth. But even if we are committed to telling the truth, the way that we speak, the way that we frame reality actually ends up influencing reality. And I don't mean that in any kind of fancy postmodernist way that there's nothing here but language, there's nothing here but what we make up. I believe that there is a reality out there, and one of the nice things about a murder mystery is that there is a reality. Somebody really dies. Somebody really caused that death. There are things that have happened in the plot of the novel that you can't get around, that aren't just about words. They're about what has happened to the human beings who, they're not real, they're made up, they're characters, but they're real in terms of the world of the book. And how you frame a question, okay, all right, here's an example. All right, and this is not in the book, but it's criminal justice related. What are we going to do about the problem of juvenile delinquency? Well, that assumes a number of things. First of all, it assumes there's such a thing called juvenile delinquency, and and that is a problem. Well, you could phrase seemingly the same question by saying, what are we going to do about the lack of opportunity that a lot of inner city kids are faced with? In which case, you're still identifying a problem, but it's actually a very different problem that's putting the blame somewhere else. And it's putting the problem, the implied solution to the problem, somewhere else. And then you proceed to create social policies and in conformity to the way you framed the question in the first place. So even though you begin using only words, the words end up taking shape because your belief about what you're saying and the way you framed the world in terms of the language you're using actually ends up shaping contributing to the way that the actual world is shaped. So yeah, I think words are really powerful. The quote, the title of the book, part of the solution, comes from a quote. It comes from Eldridge Cleaver, who was in California, and your part of the world, not mine, was one of the leaders of the Black Panther movement. And he said, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So that quote, which reverberates through the book in a number of ways, is an example of the power of language to shape the attitudes that people have. There's also, what I said before, that there was a soundtrack in the book. There's always music in the background, because music really was the genre of my and your generation. That the most powerful messages that came through the social fabric weren't books. They weren't. There wasn't painting and sculpture. It was music. It was the way the music we were listening to spread the messages and shaped the consciousness in very, very fundamental ways that hadn't always been true in history, and suddenly in the 60s and 70s had become true. So the characters are often in a kind of inner dialogue, and sometimes even talking between themselves, using the language of the songs that are playing on the record player, and it's a record player or a tape deck back then. There's one scene, for example, where the two detectives, the amateur detective Jennifer and Ford, the official detective on the case, are arguing back and forth using Bob Dylan lines. Jennifer says, "To live outside the law, you must be honest," which is a quote from a Bob Dylan song. And they go back and forth about that. And at some point, Ford, who has a great deal of integrity, says to her, no, to live inside the law, you must be honest also. And that's what my life is about. So the question of what those two different views of the law are, and the two different individual relationships to the law, one who can be kind of improvisational and individualized, and one who's responsible to the letter of the law, are actually arguing back and forth based on a line of a song. There's another scene in which Jennifer is in her head having an argument with Leonard Cohen, because that's what she's listening to. And he says something that really gets to her, and her response in her head, I realize you're a public radio station, so I won't say exactly what she says. But,
okay, thank you.
But basically, she says, okay, here's what I think about that, Leonard. So that the power of words also is in the book very much in connection with the interaction of song lyrics to the people who are listening to them.
That's another thing too. It's everything that we take in that influences what comes out of us in terms of the vocabulary that we use, and the intent that we put in our voice. The inflection is the word I want to use, inflection, and so on and so forth. I'm highly influenced, and I know this, but it is part of who I am deep inside, but I'm highly influenced by the language, by the message overall of the musicians that I love, that I have listened to for the last 50 years. People like John Denver, Harry Chapin, Dan Fogelberg, Neil Diamond, and I mean, the list goes on. I also noticed too that there are no women in there, but Olivia Newton-John and many others, including people like Judy Collins, and I'm trying to think of some of the artists from the band of the Eagles and so forth.
And certainly Joni Mitchell.
And Joni, yeah. And I mean, the list goes on, and we're influenced. And as I listen to that music today, 40, and 50 years later, number one, what really comes out is, wow, this is as pertinent today as it was when they sang it back then, when they wrote and sang these songs. And it's like, okay, well, what does that tell me about our current situation? And have we really progressed? That's one of the arguments that I have. I say, okay, is the common man, focusing on one point, better off today than they were 20, 30, 40, 50, 70 years ago? I mean, I loved the quote of Ronald Reagan when he said, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? To which I would have responded that if I am better off or if I'm not better off, it had nothing to do with you. It had to do with the choices that I made. I'm taking responsibility for my life. What about that in terms of your characters? And just in a conversation as we're talking here, in terms of this aspect of being responsible for self, for the choices that we make, as opposed to the group I grew up in broadcasting with, Christian people in broadcasting, who basically said, if it was good in my life, it was God. And if it was bad, it was the devil. And it's like, well, where's your responsibility in this process?
I have two thoughts about that, and they're diametrically opposed, and I believe them both. Both in terms of life in general, but certainly in terms of what happens to the characters in the book. On the one hand, the choices we make as individuals matter a lot in the book. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna get literary for a minute, just for a minute.
Please.
There's a wonderful line from Henry James, and I'm not saying go read Henry James. He's not for everybody, but where he's talking about the fall, as in Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And he says that the fall is the moment in every human life where that life is complicated by a regret. And that moment happens to Jennifer in that book. It happens to some other people too, but it certainly happens to Jennifer. She makes a decision as an individual who is responsible for her own decisions and knows that she's responsible, that changes her forever, that changes her relationships to the world, her relationships to some of the people around her. And in that sense, her sense of moral responsibility is very personal and very individual. And there are other characters in the book who have made equally important choices. There's one who was an anti-war activist who went to prison rather than go to Vietnam. That's an individual decision. And that the sense of individual morality that the good people in that book, and they are good people, are steeped in is a sense of individual choice and the repercussions of individual choice. On the other hand, I also tried to show in the book, and this was one of the really interesting things about rewriting a story that I'd originally conceived of decades before. It became very clear to me as I was rewriting the book that these folks are trapped in history, just like everybody else. That we are born into a world that we didn't create, that shapes us and that shapes our possibilities. And the ways that different characters are caught in history becomes a sort of sub-theme in the book. There's one of the tensions between Ford and Jennifer, which really is the central relationship in the book, is that she's a nice middle-class girl from New York City who is in the Berkshires because she just got disgusted and decided to drop out of graduate school, something she did that I never did. And she's running a cafe in the Berkshires. She's serving boysenberry muffins and herbal tea and that kind of thing. Because she has choices. She can always go back to graduate school. She's got a good middle class secure career that she can enter. She's she doesn't come from a rich family, but she has enough resources to be able to take the risk of, of just heading to the Berkshires, finding herself a little hippie community and having, delaying adulthood for a few more years, versus Ford, who's a working class kid from North Adams, who ends up being a police officer because he wants to do good in the world, and there aren't a lot of options. He's grown up working class. He's grown up with whatever pieces of education he could put together, with a little bit of community college and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And the ways in which those very different social locations deeply change the ways in which they approach the world is part of the book, and it's part of their relationship. And this little community, Flanders, Massachusetts, this little hippie village that I invented, is in the Berkshires, halfway between Williamstown and North Adams. And Williamstown is a place of, it's where Williams College is. It's a place of huge social privilege, both as a town and as a college town. And North Adams, which is not even 10 miles away, which even in the 70s was Rust Belt, where I say at one point in the book, there are more bars than employers, and where people, through no fault of their own, are living in a community where the economic bottom has fallen out of everybody's life. And that's not about individual choice. That's about history and the way we're caught in history. And so, yes, there is deeply important moral choices to be made, but they aren't made in a vacuum. They're made in historical context that we didn't create, but that we finally have to live within and at some point be loyal to, be responsible to.
Elana Michelson, my guest. AlanaMichelsonAuthor.com is the website, and being part of the solution means that you get a copy of her book. Go to her website and find out more. We hope you'll do that as well as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I am Reverend Dr. D. She is Elana Michelson, and it is really a pleasure to have a chance to talk to you. You talked about your dissertation, and I remember attending what is considered to be the last act of a PhD candidate, and that is the defending of one's dissertation. And I'm thinking, what? I at first I didn't understand it. The word, what do you mean you have to defend it?
Yep.
As I sat and I listened, I began to understand what the definition was. It wasn't adversarial, but that's what came across to me. I'm thinking, oh my God, are you going to have to stand up and sort of debate with other people who disagree with your dissertation? No, that's not what it means. It's fascinating how certain words are used, and you used one a little bit ago, regret. Regret to me is a wasted, useless thing, because what regret is saying, the subtext is, if only I could go back to that place in time and make a different choice. The reality is, number one, because we don't really know how to time travel, although there are those who are working on it. Even if you could go back in time, if you did make a different choice, you could never go back to the present as you left it, because by changing what you changed in the past, you have now sent yourself and everybody else down a whole different timeline, which now gets into whole science fiction constructs and so forth. But that's why I think it's a waste of time, because you can't. You have to make peace with the choices that you've made. And which is what my book is all about. My book, Choices, 5 Steps for Life, is talking about the 5 steps I've come up with anyway. And the first one, of course, is making a choice. But a lot of times we don't know what choices to make, do we? And then your characters, like people in general, they're only basing the choices they're making, as you quite eloquently stated just a few moments ago, on everything that they've experienced up to the moment where they've got to make a choice. As
true.
You have traveled through and then became, I'm trying to think of the right word to use here, academian, I guess is the right word. you made that choice
academic.
to go in that direction and the studies. I'm curious, first of all, about your dissertation, or maybe more importantly, the focal point of getting a PhD. Um, those kinds of choices change your life. I mean, you went in a direction that really gave you an awful lot that you wouldn't have gotten if you'd gone that way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think I went to graduate school in part because I couldn't imagine a life outside of academia. I just finished college. I had loved every minute of it.
Mm.
I was at college in the late 60s, best time ever to be a college student. I'd had a wonderful time and I didn't want it to end. Well, you go to graduate school, you get to spend, if you're lucky, and not all of us were, there weren't that many jobs in the late 70s anymore, in colleges and universities, but I think I was choosing a particular kind of life. I wanted the life of a professor. I wanted the life around students and other academics. I wanted a certain kind of a kind of career that would give me an excuse to read books and talk about them a lot. Part of it was that. Part of it was I'd fallen in love with the Middle Ages. I became a medievalist. I wanted to spend my life reading the legends of King Arthur. And I don't mean, the sword and the stone. I don't mean that. The original, some of them are earlier, but mostly 12th century legends of King Arthur. I was fascinated by the images of the Round Table and the Holy Grail. I was fascinated by, the Holy Grail is supposedly a very Christian symbol, but I was fascinated by the pagan Celtic elements in the Arthurian story, and I just fell into it. I fell in love with that imagery, with those myths and legends and characters, and then I fell in love with the Victorian novel, because the Victorian novel really tried to very much take on some of the questions we've been talking about now, about you and I have been talking about just now, about how you grow up in a world not of your making and somehow have to figure out how to reconcile your own personal desires with a social reality that's much bigger and much stronger than you're ever going to be, and what the compromises are that you make. And there's a lot of, I made Jennifer, my main character, of a once and future graduate student in literature, and just like she's always interacting with different pieces of music, different songs and song lyrics and songwriters, she's also interacting often with some of the novels that she loves the most. Some of the, is she going to be, so she'll think about Wuthering Heights. She'll think about Middlemarch. She'll think about, a Jane Austen character, and she often uses literature as a way to frame her understanding. The thing about literature or one of the things about literature that's so interesting, novels especially, is that they're narrative, that you live in stories. And I think we do. I think that human consciousness is structured in such a way that we make sense of quote unquote reality. And let's not try to debate what that word means when it's at home, but that we make sense of what we're experiencing by telling stories, including telling stories about ourselves and identifying with stories that other people have told that somehow reverberate with who we are.
Mm. Yeah, it's very interesting language. I've struggled with this over the years when it came to not only my early days in broadcasting at a Christian station, but even after the fact. And I remember learning in a personal growth program about Hebrew. Now, it wasn't a program that dealt specifically, but it was trying to make a point about how that language and its characters, the 22 letters of the alphabet, have their own legend, kind of like a map. When you get a map, and down in the corner there, it describes for you, tells you what each of these symbols means, these lines, the red and black line, or the dotted line, or this or that or the other. So each of these letters has its own story, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
You start putting those letters together to words, to sentences, to paragraphs, to chapters, to books, and you have a whole very deep story, a subtext, if you will. The moment you translate that into another language, it's gone because it doesn't translate over into the other languages. A case in point, I saw this little documentary having to do with these gentlemen who basically claim that in the Old Testament, where the Ten Commandments is described, the one commandment about thou shalt not kill, which has been that way for 2,000 years. And now all of a sudden they're coming along and saying, well, it was mistranslated. Actually, the word is murder, not kill. And I'm going, so you are smarter than everybody that's come before you in 2,000 years. All right, well, let's take it to the New Testament. And there's a passage, and I read this one book by an author who was trying to make a point as well, that the rapture passage is not literal. As he began to define it in his book, you began to realize, oh, that isn't a literal happening based upon the original languages. And that's one of the interesting things, even in the United States, you actually do have a different language in each of the different eras. If you start breaking down a decade like the 1900s, you have different words that are used for the same thing we would use today, but as you go along. And I find that rather extraordinary. My first wife and her family, her grandfather was from Russia. He got out of Russia the night before the Bolshevik Revolution. And of course, I realized that particular choice of his, had he not done that, I might not be married to this woman and learning what I'm learning. But according to what I was getting from them, in Slavonic, there is one word for car and dishwasher and washing machine, and the word basically is loosely translated machine. Mm-hmm. But it's one word to describe all of this stuff. What about that? What about that, bridging that gap from, I mean, even just in English, let alone from one language to another, in terms of how we can start to understand one another and start to accept, not tolerate, but accept one another for the person that they are?
I'm not sure we do that through language, but I did have a thought when you were talking about, the argument about what the original Hebrew, or in the case of the New Testament, the original Greek means. And there's a wonderful legend that it might be in the Talmud. I'm not actually sure. This is not my area of expertise by any means, but an image. The story is that Moses comes back and is overhearing a debate among scholars. The endless, I mean, we all know the image of the rabbi and the students in the room arguing. Mm-hmm. Arguing Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses. And they're debating some point in one of the 5 books of Moses. And Moses says, but that's not what I meant. And the response from God or from whoever is, no, but it's what you will mean. With the understanding that language changes. That the crazy thing about certain kinds of fundamentalisms, whether it's religious fundamentalism or the originalism idea of some of the conservative justices on the Supreme Court that we're stuck with the Constitution, that we have to, it's all about what the intention of the founders were, as if anybody could ever know what John Adams what John Adams thought about AI. I mean, well, good luck with that. But the problem with the problem with that kind of linguistic fundamentalism is that language also exists in history, and that concepts that are based in the words that we use for things evolve. That we don't own the words we use. Mm-hmm. And then this is, that there are, that when we use a word, we are bringing to it all of the other things that word once meant, very much rooted in what the current reality is and anticipating what the word is going to mean the next time someone uses it. We don't own those words. We borrow them. And we borrow them like we borrow the air we breathe, which is just rushing past us. We just happen to be at one place in a moment where a particular molecule of oxygen goes up somebody's particular nose, but we don't own that. Mm-hmm. We're only borrowing it for a moment. And to the degree that language is a human product, it's an historical product that we have to be, that we have to have enough humility to understand is changing at every moment. Both as it changes in interaction with us, it changes in interaction with the circumstances of the world that are evolving at any moment, and it never stands still.
Yeah. Just a sidebar point, and that would be that when I think about that documentary on that specific word in that particular commandment and so forth, and I think, well, wait a minute, I'm sorry, but your argument is irrelevant. And here's the reason I would say that. What I was taught as I was a kid growing up, and what I have read, is that you had the Old Covenant or contract, and then, according to Christianity, you have a new contract or commitment. And that the new commitment fulfilled the old contract. So the old contract is now null and void, which means that the commandments are irrelevant because, as is stated in the New Testament, he says, I give you a new commandment. Love one another. Do unto other and I like to rephrase it, do unto other as if you were the other, and so forth. But, so I sit there and I go, well, that's fine. You can argue this whole thing about it should be murder and not kill. I don't care, because that's not what I live under anymore. I live under the new contract that has only one line in it. It's so much easier, and it lets me do things rather than thou shalt not. But anyway, no, I don't want to go any further down that road.
Well, no, well, first of all, I'm Jewish, and I don't accept anything you just said in the last 2 minutes.
I understand.
I did before because I was trying to be clear, because I know you've got listeners, but I don't even use the words the Old Testament and the New Testament, precisely because the New Testament implies that it's somehow taken over
right
from the Old Testament. And there's boy, you're really reaching into the dregs of my Jewish scholarship. There's so little of it, but there's one. I think it's Rabbi Hillel who was asked to sum up the totality of what everything in the Bible means while standing on one leg, and he said, "That's easy. Do unto others as you would have others do unto them." Unto you. Mm-hmm. That the Hebrew and Greek scriptures are filled with the same message, the being good to the stranger, feeding the hungry. You hear that over and over and over. That and this is something that now obviously given the current the current politics around the issue of immigration, the fact that both testaments, both the Greek scripture and the Hebrew scripture, say emphasize goodness to the stranger. Ger is the word in Hebrew. It's somebody was telling me 70 something times in the Hebrew scriptures that the image of the stranger and the need to be good to the stranger is there. Listen, we know the kinds of terrible interpretations that all religious texts are subject to, and the terrible cost in human life and human suffering that is justified by religious texts is something that we know all too well in this world. Does that mean that we have to make sure that we don't use that language itself doesn't become a god that then justifies terrible actions? Maybe so.
Well, it's one of the interesting paradoxes that I have come across, and that is that it has been stated, and this is one of the things I love about these different cultures that utilize what's referred to as the oral tradition. Mm-hmm. If you are going to be a member of that particular class of that community, you must learn the stories exactly the way the elder storytellers tell it, word for word. You cannot change anything, even regardless of how the culture changes. That's sort of like the commitment that you make. Whereas the truth, for example, I heard this statement once: truth is only truth until it is written down. And then we get into the whole quagmire of, defining the terms, pulling out the dictionary or the Strong's Concordance, whatever you choose to use. And I will also say, too, that those were questions that I was asking in those early years, in my 20s and early 30s, as I was searching for answers to questions that apparently the founding fathers were asking. And I said, well, okay, does that mean that I can elevate myself to that level because I'm asking those questions? Which, again, I'm not an egotist. But then there was the other part of it too, as well, who set them up as the founding fathers of the faith? What's the criterion and all of that kind of stuff? I got a little belligerent of sorts back then, But I will tell you that some of my favorite conversations and interviews on this program have been with rabbis, because I have limited understanding of what it is that they go through in the process to become a rabbi. I mean, it's not a 4-year college deal here, and so forth. So I've always enjoyed those, and the challenging questions they've asked me when we were conversing about a particular law in the Old Testament, in the 613 laws, Jewish laws. He says, "Do you know the context under which this law was created?" I said, "No, I don't," and I had never thought of that before, as far as context, which puts a whole different view on whatever the law is that you're looking at. He says, "Well, why was that done?" There was a reason. There must have been a reason. They just didn't do it because they wanted to do it, and we want to have over 600 laws. We really want a big book of laws. And that's not the way they looked at it. And so it opened up my eyes, and I remember being told about my perspective on something, and I said, well, there goes another one of my straw huts in flames. Honestly, I'll burn them all to the ground and start over if that's what it takes to have a better understanding. Is that part of what you, because this conversation has kind of gone in a lot of different directions, but is that kind of where you come from too? Is that you're just trying to figure it out just like everybody else? And sometimes through the different works that you have written, again, this just being your first novel of fiction, you're trying to figure out this world and yourself and your part in it, just like the rest of us?
Well, just like the rest of us is just like the rest of us. I think that's all any of us do. One of the things that's interesting to me is that a lot of my scholarship had to do with theories of experience and theories of knowledge, and the ways in which the experience of an individual and the learning based on those experiences count and is recognized. The ways in which the knowledge and skills and traditions of women, of people of color, of people who live in the global south, people who live in the rural areas and not the urban areas, the ways in which their knowledge is historically discounted. And a lot of that's about class, race, and gender, but a lot of it is also about who happens to have the economic power at any given time. And those questions, I think those questions are really important ones. So in that sense, all of my books are about that, about what we learn from experience. Do we learn from experience, and how the experience of different human beings, including the ones in novels, including the ones in my novel, actually get presented in the world, get understood by the world, get valued or not valued in the world. I think that's what literature is about. But yeah, I'm just trying to figure it out, like everyone else. And the reason that I love novels is that they talk about people they tell the story of people who are trying to figure it out as well.
Yeah. Elana Michelson, AlanaMichelsonAuthor.com is the website. We hope that you'll go there. We'll be linked to that website as well as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I know that we are fast approaching the end of our time here together. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm here to learn just like everybody else. I refer to the various religions around the world more as philosophies, and people choose to believe what they choose to believe and put together new elements to create new philosophies, and that's all fine, well, and good. I'm a person that enjoys these kinds of conversations, and I thank you so much for being a part of what we're trying to do here to open people's minds a little bit. I hope open their eyes a little bit to the way that it really is. I mean, you use the word reality a couple of 3 times through here, and I think that's another wonderful conversation to have, as well as, not only what is reality, but do we really make our own reality? And maybe one day we'll have that conversation. But I thank you so much for being on the program today.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I do have 3 final questions I want to ask you that I ask all of my guests. But before I do, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming at all those times at richarddugan.com, with podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio. We're also on YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will subscribe and click notification. We also ask you to go to Amazon.com to get a copy of my book, Choices, 5 Steps for Life. And we also ask if you can leave us a tip. Our tip jar is called PayPal, and there are links at richarddugan.com to both Amazon and PayPal. So we hope that you will avail yourselves of that. And finally, we hope that you will take some time during the decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with all of that being said, we go to our final 3 questions for our very special guest. And the first of those is, who is Elana Michelson?
Well, the glib part of me wants to say I have absolutely no idea.
I know.
But Elana Michelson's the person that was just talking to you, Richard. Is the person that wrote part of theSolution. Is the person that, like my characters, is trying to figure out, how do you live with integrity? How do you live honorably in a world that we all know could be a lot better? and who hopefully has no worse a balance between having made good choices and made bad choices, doing good things and doing bad things as everybody else.
Mm. What gets you up in the morning?
Besides coffee. Besides the fact that at least here in the Hudson Valley, it's a beautiful early winter day where the snow is coming down and the occasional hungry cold bird is singing. Hope.
Mm.
And when I can't find hope, at least a little bit of commitment to maybe doing something in the world that day that's worth doing.
Mm. And finally, what was your best day?
Good question. I have 4 grandchildren, so I would have to say 4 days.
Okay.
That's one answer. Back in the 60s, I once took an LSD trip on the Isle of Hydra in Greece. I'll never forget it. But that's no necessarily better than the walk in the woods I took last week.
Well, once again, I thank you so much for being a part of Tell Me Your Story. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. And until our next broadcast, podcast, video cast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I'm still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Mike, thanks for letting me be in your life and you being in mine. Smokey, I will see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm trying to keep with your time frame here. It is actually top of the hour, so I should let you go. But thank you so much. I do have your email address. I'll be sending you links to the YouTube and to the SoundCloud channels for you. I'll be putting this together probably later today or first thing tomorrow. So I'll send you the links today and just keep checking back, okay?
That's great, Richard. Thank you so much.
And I would love to have you back on the program again.
Happy to come back anytime you like.
All right. Blessings to you.
And
Bye-bye.
you.